I am Julian, and I am 33 years old. For 7 grueling, isolated years, I sacrificed my youth, my health, and my sanity to build a $2 billion artificial intelligence company from a damp, windowless basement. And in return, my own parents sold my life's work to a pharmaceutical giant and threw me out onto the street with absolutely nothing. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I was standing in the center of our corporate boardroom. The room was a monument to wealth, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling glass walls offering a breathtaking, unobstructed view of the city skyline. My father, Victor, sat at the head of the massive mahogany table. He wore a bespoke suit, looking every bit the untouchable CEO. He looked me dead in the eye, his expression completely devoid of any paternal warmth, and delivered a sentence that shattered my entire reality. The entirety of the $2 billion acquisition fund is going to your brother, Silas, he announced. His voice was a chilling echo against the glass walls. And as for you, Julian, pack your belongings. You are terminated. Effective immediately. I stared at him. The air rushed out of my lungs, leaving me suffocating in the heavy tension of the room. So, you just sold my code? I asked. My voice was barely a whisper, yet it sounded deafening in the silence. My mother, Beatrice, sat to his right. She let out a short, dismissive laugh, smoothing the fabric of her expensive designer skirt with a heavily manicured hand. We sold our business, Julian, she chuckled coldly. Stop being so delusional and face reality. They said this right in front of Harrison, the billionaire CEO of Horizon Pharma, the colossal company that had just signed the monumental check. They humiliated me publicly, stripping away my dignity like it was nothing but a cheap, disposable piece of paper. But there is one massive detail my greedy family did not know. They had absolutely no idea that they did not actually own the foundational source code they had just sold. And right now, as they face devastating federal charges, a massive civil lawsuit, and the total loss of their luxury real estate, they are on their knees begging me for mercy. Before I tell you exactly how I legally and systematically destroyed the family that betrayed me, please hit the like button if you believe that justice always catches up to greedy people. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Your support means everything to me. Now, let us go back to the exact moment my nightmare began, and how I turned it into my ultimate victory. The air in the boardroom was thick and unbreathable. Harrison, the imposing chief executive who had just signed the acquisition paperwork, shifted uncomfortably in his heavy leather executive chair. He was a man who commanded entire industries, a man used to ruthless negotiations. Yet even he seemed deeply disturbed by the toxic family drama unfolding right in front of his eyes. A professional corporate buyout had suddenly turned into a brutal familial execution. But my father did not care about optics or professional courtesy. He only cared about establishing total, unquestionable dominance. Victor raised his right hand and gave a sharp, silent signal to the 2 burly security guards stationed by the heavy double doors. They stepped forward instantly, their heavy boots thudding against the polished hardwood floor. They did not give me a single moment to process the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. One guard grabbed my left arm with a bruising, aggressive grip, while the other crowded my right side. They treated me exactly like a hostile corporate spy, a dangerous threat that needed to be neutralized, rather than the founding scientist who had built the very foundation of the empire they were standing in. I did not struggle. I shrugged them off with a sharp jerk of my shoulders, forcing myself to maintain my physical composure as I walked out of the glass-enclosed boardroom. The silence in the main hallway was absolute and profoundly humiliating. I walked down the center aisle of the open-plan office. Dozens of employees were at their desks. These were people I had trained from their first day. People I had shared late-night pizzas with while debugging complex biological algorithms. People whose salaries were paid directly by the software I had written. Suddenly, every single one of them found their computer monitors incredibly fascinating. Not a single person dared to make eye contact with me. My father ruled the company through fear and intimidation, and my public execution was a clear, undeniable warning to everyone else on the payroll. Cross the family and you are dead. Silas, my older brother by 2 years, trailed closely behind me. A smug, arrogant grin was permanently plastered across his face. He was wearing a custom Italian suit that cost more than a standard employee's annual salary. It was completely funded by the corporate profits my sleepless nights had generated. Silas clapped his hands together, the sharp sound echoing through the office like a whip. "Let us get a move on, genius," Silas sneered, his voice dripping with venomous condescension. "We have a massive company to hand over to Harrison today, and you are currently trespassing on private property." I reached my office. It was not a corner suite with expansive windows. Despite developing the core artificial intelligence that predicted genetic mutations, the very algorithm that justified the $2 billion price tag, my parents had always insisted I stay in a small, cramped workspace near the noisy server room. They constantly claimed the corner offices were strictly reserved for client-facing executives like Silas. Now, a cheap cardboard box sat squarely on my desk, waiting for me. My mother, Beatrice, sauntered into the room directly behind Silas. She looked immaculate, wearing a diamond necklace that caught the harsh fluorescent light and a dress that cost more than a reliable used car. She leaned against the doorframe, looking at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated disdain. "Do not take all day, Julian," Beatrice snapped, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. "We have a celebratory dinner booked at a Michelin-starred restaurant tonight, and we absolutely cannot be late just because you are dawdling. Pack your little desk toys and leave." I picked up a small framed photograph of my dog and placed it carefully into the cardboard box. My hands were remarkably steady, completely betraying the massive hurricane of grief and blinding rage tearing through my chest. I looked directly at my mother. I searched her eyes for a single shred of maternal instinct. I looked for a tiny hint of guilt, a flicker of remorse for what she was participating in. There was absolutely nothing. She looked at me the way a wealthy person looks at a broken appliance they are finally throwing in the trash. "You were given a wonderful opportunity to work for this family," Beatrice stated smoothly, adjusting her perfect posture. "But you always harbored this arrogant streak. You thought because you typed up some mathematical equations in a basement, you were suddenly the boss of us all. Your father and I took all the financial risks. We built the brand from nothing. Silas managed the critical client relationships. You were merely the hired help who got a little too full of yourself." The sheer audacity of her historical rewrite was staggering. They took zero financial risks. I had drained my own meager savings to buy our initial computer servers. I had worked completely unpaid for the first 3 years while they drained the corporate accounts to fund their lavish country club lifestyle and buy luxury real estate. And Silas had never managed a single client relationship. He just showed up to the final pitch meetings, flashed his perfect, expensive teeth, and read the presentation slides I had meticulously written for him every single time. "So, $2 billion, I said, placing my favorite coffee mug into the cardboard box. "And you are giving every single cent to the golden child who failed basic college biology." "He is the vice president of sales," my mother corrected sharply, her voice raising just enough for the lingering staff in the hallway to hear. "He is the face of this enterprise. He is a natural leader. You, on the other hand, have always lacked social grace and basic business acumen. We are simply rectifying a wrong today. We are ensuring the wealth goes to the child who actually knows how to carry the family legacy forward. You should be thanking us on your knees for keeping you employed this long, considering your constant mental instability." Mental instability. That was their favorite weapon. That was the precise, toxic phrase they consistently employed to gaslight me whenever I demanded equity or fair compensation. If I asked for the promotion I deserved, I was deemed crazy. If I complained about working 90-hour weeks while Silas took expensive ski trips on the corporate card, I was labeled hysterical. They had systematically isolated me, making sure I poured every ounce of my soul into the code while they completely controlled the entire narrative outside my office door. I closed the flaps of the cardboard box. The security guards took a synchronized step forward, poised to physically throw me into the parking lot. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not beg for my job back. Panic is a useless emotion, an ineffective variable I always exclude from my logical processing. I simply picked up the box, looked right through my brother's smug face, and walked out of the building. They thought they had won. They thought they had just secured a massive fortune and successfully eliminated the only person who truly understood how the system actually worked. They had absolutely no idea what they had just unleashed. I thought the worst was over. I was so incredibly wrong. The public train ride back to my downtown apartment was agonizingly slow. I sat on a hard, unforgiving plastic seat, the sharp edges of the cardboard box digging painfully into my thighs. Across from me, two young men in signature TechBro fleece vests loudly discussed their startup valuations and stock options. Their arrogant, booming laughter echoed throughout the train car, sounding exactly like Silas. I stared blankly out the scratched window as the sprawling tech campuses blurred past, forcing my mind to process the brutal, undeniable reality of my situation. Just 2 hours ago, I was the invisible architect of a $2 billion empire. I was the brain that made the entire machine run. Now I was just an unemployed man clutching a cardboard box full of cheap desk trinkets, heading home to figure out how to pay my next month of rent. My mind drifted back to the very beginning, pulling up memories I had tried so hard to suppress. I thought about the long, suffocating years I spent in the windowless basement of my parents' old house. The air always smelled like damp concrete and ozone from the overheating computer towers. I remembered the endless nights fueled by cheap instant coffee, my fingers cramping from typing thousands of lines of code. I built the complex predictive models while Victor and Beatrice were vacationing in Europe, sending me photos of their luxury hotel suites. I debugged the neural networks on Thanksgiving Day, sitting completely alone in the dark, while Silas was busy ruining the family dinner by getting drunk and crashing a company golf cart into a neighbor's fence. Growing up, the dynamic in our household was entirely clear and rigidly enforced. Silas was the sun, and I was just the dirt he walked on. He was loud, charismatic, and completely immune to consequences. I was quiet, analytical, and treated as a highly functional tool. If Silas wanted a brand new sports car, my parents would happily dip into my college fund to make the down payment. I remember finding the bank statements when I was 18. They had drained the account they promised would pay for my tuition, simply because Silas had wrecked his previous vehicle in a DUI incident that Victor paid heavily to sweep under the rug. When I confronted them about the stolen college fund, Victor just waved his hand dismissively. He looked at me from over his morning newspaper and said that family supports family. But that support only ever flowed in one single direction. I was heavily conditioned to believe that my worth was strictly tied to my utility. I was the workhorse. I was supposed to stay in the shadows, quietly fixing the massive, expensive problems Silas constantly created, and I was expected to be grateful for the opportunity to serve them. The only thing that kept me sane during those brutal, isolating years was Clara. Clara and I had been engaged for exactly 8 months. She was a senior portfolio manager at a highly aggressive, cutthroat investment firm downtown. She was brilliant with numbers, ruthless in financial negotiations, and she always told me she deeply admired my relentless work ethic. She was the one person who saw my potential. When I first confided in her about the highly complex artificial intelligence code I was developing for the family business, she was the one who encouraged my late-night efforts. She would sit on our kitchen counter, drinking an expensive glass of wine, promising me that the eventual payout would make all the dark circles under my eyes totally worthwhile. She talked about our future. She talked about buying real estate, building a diverse investment portfolio, and finally breaking free from my father's oppressive control. I envisioned her beautiful face as the train finally shuddered to a halt at my station. Clara would be incandescent with fury on my behalf. She would abandon whatever high-stakes financial portfolio she was analyzing, pour me a glass of the expensive red wine we saved for special occasions, and sit down at our dining table. She would pull out her laptop and help me craft a merciless, devastating counteroffensive. She knew powerful corporate lawyers. She understood how to exploit financial discrepancies and pierce corporate veils. She would be my unwavering anchor in this sudden, devastating storm. The mere thought of her supportive embrace gave me the strength to carry the heavy box the remaining 6 blocks to our luxury apartment building. The doorman offered his usual polite nod, though his eyes lingered curiously on the cardboard box. I managed a tight, forced smile and stepped into the elevator. I took a deep, steadying breath as the digital numbers ascended to our floor. I rehearsed the words I would use to convey the news. I was determined to present the facts logically without hysteria, so we could immediately transition into problem-solving mode. I inserted my key into the lock and pushed the heavy wooden door open. The scene that greeted me brought my steps to a dead, paralyzing halt. The apartment was in absolute, terrifying chaos. Closet doors down the hallway were thrown wide open, hanging off their tracks. Expensive tailored dresses, silk blouses, and plastic dry cleaning bags were haphazardly piled across our custom velvet sofa in the living room. The drawers of the entryway console table had been pulled out and left ajar. For a brief, terrifying second, my analytical mind registered a home invasion. I almost dropped the box to call the police. But then I heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of footsteps coming from our master bedroom. I walked slowly into the living room, the cardboard box suddenly feeling 100 times heavier in my arms. In the exact center of our expensive Persian rug sat an enormous piece of designer luggage. Clara was forcefully shoving her expensive designer shoes and folded blazers into the massive leather suitcase. Her makeup bags and personal financial documents were already piled by the front door. She wasn't packing for a quick weekend business trip. She was evacuating the premises. "Clara," I said, my voice cut sharply through the tense, heavy silence of the apartment. She physically jumped. Her shoulders tensed defensively beneath her silk blouse before she spun around to face me. She did not look relieved to see her future husband. She did not look worried. Her eyes quickly shifted from my face down to the cardboard box I was holding. She registered the framed photo of the dog and the cheap office supplies sticking out of the top. A dark, calculating expression washed over her elegant features. It was the exact same cold, predatory look she used when short-selling a failing stock on the trading floor. There was absolutely no warmth in the room. The comforting embrace I had desperately anticipated evaporated into the cold, sterile air. She stood up slowly, crossing her arms over her chest. She did not ask if I was okay. She did not ask why I was home in the middle of the workday holding my desk belongings. She did not offer a single word of comfort. The chaotic mess surrounding the living room suddenly materialized into horrifying, perfect sense. The betrayal had not been confined to the glass walls of my family's boardroom. It had followed me all the way home, patiently waiting in the very center of my supposed sanctuary. Clara reached into the pocket of her tailored blazer and pulled out a small, familiar velvet box. She walked over to the kitchen island and placed it deliberately on the marble counter, right next to where I had just set down my cardboard box. She flipped the lid open with her thumb. The flawless diamond engagement ring I had purchased with years of hard-earned savings sat inside. It caught the overhead light, sparkling brilliantly, mocking my entire existence and every dream I had built around her. "Silas called me," Clara stated. Her voice was utterly devoid of any human emotion. It was a clinical, detached tone, like she was liquidating a defunct corporate asset that was dragging down her portfolio. "He told me everything. $2 billion. Julian, the company was sold for $2 billion, and you let them walk you out the door without securing a single cent of equity. You let them play you like an absolute amateur." I stared at the sparkling diamond, feeling the ground entirely drop out from beneath my feet. I slowly raised my eyes to meet the gaze of the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. "They stole my code, Clara. My own parents kicked me out of the building to hand the entire fortune over to Silas. I thought you would understand. I thought we would hire a lawyer and fight them in court together. We are a team." Clara let out a short, harsh, incredibly ugly laugh. She zipped up her massive leather suitcase with a sharp, decisive pull. "Fight them with what exactly? You have no money. You have no job. You do not even have a basic severance package. I am a portfolio manager, Julian. I calculate risk and return for a living. You are currently the biggest financial liability in this entire city. You are a bad investment. Her words struck my chest like a physical blow, aiming directly for my deepest insecurities, but they did not break me. My analytical mind simply categorized the new data, instantly updating my understanding of her true character. She had never loved me. She had only loved my proximity to a massive tech buyout. She loved the future inheritance. She loved the idea of the wealth I could provide. Silas made me a very lucrative offer, Clara continued, casually checking her reflection in the hallway mirror and adjusting her hair. He needs someone highly competent to manage the massive transition of the sale funds. He offered me the chief financial officer position, 7 figures in exclusive stock options within his new holding company, a substantial signing bonus, and he is personally handing me the keys to a brand new Ferrari this afternoon as a welcome gift. And the only condition, I replied, my voice dropping to a glacial chill, was that you drop the dead weight. Clara smirked, grabbing the sturdy handle of her suitcase. The wheels rolled smoothly over the Persian rug. Silas is a complete idiot, but he holds the capital now. I go where the money flows. You spent 7 years writing a brilliant biological algorithm in a dark basement, but you never learned how to secure the bag in the real world. I cannot build an empire with a man who allows his own family to walk all over him and take his life's work for free. You are a failure, Julian. Good luck figuring out your next move. She rolled her suitcase past me, her expensive heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She did not look back. The heavy front door slammed shut, the metallic click of the lock echoing loudly in the empty apartment. I stood there in the absolute silence. I did not shed a single tear. My heart rate remained perfectly steady. The initial shock of the day had entirely dissipated, replaced by a cold, calculating, and incredibly dangerous focus. My brain completely detached from the arrogant woman who had just walked out my door. She was no longer my partner. She was merely another hostile variable that required immediate, ruthless neutralization. I thought she had dealt the final blow, but the true storm was only just gathering. I walked over to the far end of the kitchen counter where my personal laptop rested. I opened the screen. The blue glow illuminated my face as my fingers danced rapidly across the mechanical keyboard. I accessed a highly secure, encrypted financial portal I had established months prior for my personal business ventures. Clara thought she was driving away to a new, glamorous life. She thought Silas was actually competent enough to manage a luxury vehicle purchase. But I knew my brother's financial history intimately. Silas had terrible personal credit. His credit score was a graveyard of missed payments, defaulted loans, and reckless spending. He had been secretly using a corporate account to fund his lavish lifestyle, including the massive down payment for Clara's promised Ferrari. But that specific corporate account was not a general company fund. It was directly linked to a limited liability company that I had personally registered and completely controlled. With a few precise keystrokes, I accessed the account dashboard. I reported the corporate card completely stolen and flagged the massive dealership transaction as highly fraudulent. The dealership's finance department would instantly halt the vehicle delivery. Since Clara, driven by her blinding greed, had eagerly signed the preliminary guarantor paperwork this morning thinking she was stepping into a wealthy executive role, the dealership would now default to the primary guarantor on the lease agreement. They would hold Clara personally liable for the entire purchase price of a heavily customized luxury sports car she did not even possess. She was about to be hit with a debt collection notice for nearly $200,000. It was a financial disaster that would trigger a severe compliance investigation at her investment firm and completely destroy her pristine credit score. I pressed the enter key with a satisfying click. Enjoy the walk, Clara. The morning sun pierced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment. I had not slept a single minute. Instead, I had spent the entire night dissecting the merger and acquisition documents between my family business and Horizon Pharma. I needed strong black coffee before I contacted my legal counsel to initiate the war. I walked down to the upscale espresso bar on the ground floor of my building. The barista, A young man who knew my usual order handed me my coffee. I tapped my primary platinum debit card against the payment terminal. A harsh beep broke the morning quiet. Declined. The barista frowned apologetically, wiping the terminal screen with a cloth and asking me to try again. I tapped the card a second time. Another sharp beep. Declined. I pulled out my backup credit card, a corporate account I had personally guaranteed. Declined. A cold, heavy knot formed in my stomach. It was not out of panic, but out of pure, calculated realization. I stepped aside, allowing the customer behind me to pay, and walked out onto the bustling San Francisco sidewalk. The cool morning air hit my face as I pulled out my smartphone. I opened my private banking application. The loading screen spun for an unusually long time. When the dashboard finally materialized, a massive red banner glared back at me across the digital interface. Account frozen. Please contact your branch manager immediately regarding an active court order. I dialed the direct line to Simon, my wealth manager. He answered on the first ring. His voice was trembling with an uncomfortable mix of professional courtesy and sheer, unadulterated panic. Julian, Simon started immediately, his words rushing out in a terrified stream. I am so incredibly sorry. Our legal compliance department received an emergency injunction at exactly 6 o'clock this morning. We had absolutely no choice but to comply with a temporary asset freeze on all your personal and business accounts. I kept my voice completely level, showing zero emotion. On what grounds did a judge sign off on an emergency injunction without notifying me first? Simon? He swallowed hard, clearly terrified to be caught in the crossfire of a billionaire family feud. Your father, acting as the chief executive officer of the company, filed an expedited corporate espionage claim late last night. The legal filing alleges that you removed highly sensitive proprietary company property from the premises. They told the judge that the cardboard box you carried out contained encrypted hard drives loaded with the $2 billion artificial intelligence algorithm. The judge granted a temporary freeze on your assets to prevent you from fleeing the jurisdiction or selling the allegedly stolen data to foreign competitors. The sheer, blinding audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Victor had weaponized the federal legal system against his own son overnight. He knew perfectly well there were no hard drives in that cardboard box. He knew his security guards had watched my every single move, and the building's camera system had recorded me packing a coffee mug and a photo. This was not a legitimate legal strategy. It was a brutal, medieval siege tactic. They wanted to starve me out. They wanted to completely cut off my access to legal representation by draining my financial resources in a matter of hours. They wanted me destitute, desperate, and broken, crawling back to them on my knees. Thank you for the update, Simon, I said coldly. Do not process any further requests from my family without my explicit verbal authorization. I ended the call and slipped my phone into my pocket. Almost immediately, the device vibrated violently against my hip. The caller identification displayed my father's name. I let it ring 3 times, intentionally controlling the pace of the interaction, before hitting the green button and lifting the phone to my ear. Good morning, Julian, Victor said. His voice was incredibly smooth, dripping with the fake paternal benevolence he always employed right before completely crushing a business rival. I assume you have tried to buy your morning coffee by now. I stared at the busy intersection in front of me, watching the traffic flow with mathematical precision. You filed a fraudulent claim with a federal judge, I stated factually. You and I both know that box contained nothing but a framed photo and a coffee mug. Perjury is an exceptionally dangerous game to play when you are in the middle of a $2 billion corporate handover. My father laughed, a dark, rumbling sound that made my blood run cold. Prove it, he challenged confidently. We have the absolute best corporate lawyers in the state on our payroll. You currently have $0 to hire a defense attorney. We can drag this out in civil court for years. We will drain you until you are sleeping on the street, begging for change. I remained entirely silent, letting his aggressive threats hang in the empty air over the phone line. My silence always unnerved him, It meant I was analyzing him, and he absolutely hated being analyzed. Listen to me very carefully, Victor continued, his tone rapidly shifting from amused to aggressively commanding. Your mother and I are willing to be reasonable. We understand you threw a childish tantrum yesterday because you felt left out of the financial windfall. We are willing to drop the lawsuit. We are willing to unfreeze your accounts. But you have to earn your way back into this family. I leaned against the brick wall of my apartment building, feeling the cold stone through my jacket. And what exactly does earning my way back entail, Victor? A heavy, highly theatrical sigh came through the receiver. You need to learn respect. We are hosting a private celebration party at the estate this evening. The absolute top tier of the city will be there. Investors, developers, and the board members of Horizon Pharma. I want you to walk through those front doors tonight. I want you to stand in front of me, your mother, and your brother. You will drop to your knees in front of our wealthy guests, and you will publicly apologize for your insubordination. You will admit that your erratic, hysterical behavior caused your termination. If you can humble yourself and show true remorse, I will transfer $50,000 into your account tomorrow morning so you can start over somewhere else. He was actively trying to break my spirit entirely. He wanted a massive public spectacle to solidify their false narrative that I was just a hysterical, ungrateful child who contributed nothing of value to the company. $50,000. It was an insulting, pathetic crumb meant to secure my permanent submission while they walked away with billions. They genuinely thought they had trapped me in an inescapable financial corner. They thought my entire existence, my ability to eat and pay rent, depended on the funds they had just locked away. But Victor and Beatrice had made one fatal, catastrophic miscalculation in their aggressive strategy. They assumed I was as careless and ignorant with my assets as Silas was. They assumed the money they froze was my only lifeline. I will not be attending any public apologies, Victor, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. You are making a massive mistake, he growled, the facade of the caring father vanishing instantly, replaced by pure venom. You have until tonight. If you do not show up. I ended the call without another word. The threat was just empty noise. I did not need his money to survive the week. I did not need his permission to work in the industry. I only needed my intellect, and I needed my legal counsel. I hailed a taxi, paying the driver with a crisp $100 bill I kept hidden in the lining of my coat for emergencies exactly like this one. I instructed the driver to take me directly to the downtown legal district. The financial blockade was a minor inconvenience. The real war, the one that would leave their empire in ashes, was about to begin. I spent the entire afternoon inside the secure, soundproof conference room of my intellectual property lawyer, Valerie. Valerie was brilliant, ruthless, and arguably the most terrifying legal mind on the West Coast. She did not operate on emotion, family ties, or sentimentality. She operated purely on undeniable, crushing leverage. We mapped out every possible legal contingency and locked down the hidden corporate structures I had meticulously established years ago. By the time I returned to my apartment building, a courier had left a heavy, gold-embossed envelope with the concierge. I took the envelope upstairs and opened it. It was an official, highly exclusive invitation to the $2 billion victory gala being held at my parents' private estate that very evening. Beatrice was not extending an olive branch. She was summoning me to my own public execution. She wanted me to witness the massive empire she had stolen, and she wanted to ensure the entire tech industry saw me completely broken, defeated, and kneeling for my $50,000 payout. Since Victor had successfully frozen my bank accounts, paying for a premium ride service or a limousine was entirely out of the question. I refused to touch my emergency cash reserves for a trivial luxury just to stroke their egos. Instead, I went to my closet. I put on my sharpest, most expensive black designer suit. I straightened my silk tie, polished my shoes until they gleamed, and took the commuter train as far as it would go. From the train station, I walked the remaining 2 miles up the steep, winding roads of the exclusive, gated neighborhood. Luxury vehicles, sleek black town cars, An expensive sports car zipped past me in the fading evening light, splashing through the shallow puddles on the road. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my breathing deeply controlled. The physical exertion sharpened my focus. By the time I reached the massive wrought iron gates of my childhood home, I was not exhausted. I was highly energized, and I was ready for absolute war. The mansion was completely transformed for the evening. Valets in crisp white uniforms rushed to park an endless stream of expensive cars. String musicians played a sophisticated arrangement on the sprawling, perfectly manicured front lawn, and the entire property was bathed in dramatic theatrical lighting. Waiters circulated through the crowd with silver trays loaded with vintage champagne and imported caviar. This was not just a celebration of a corporate buyout. It was a royal coronation for my brother, Silas. I bypassed the crowded main entrance and walked confidently through the side terrace doors. The grand ballroom was packed with the most influential figures in the city. I recognized prominent venture capitalists, board members of rival firms, tech journalists, and several senior executives from Horizon Pharma, including Harrison. These were the exact people who controlled the flow of capital, reputation, and opportunity in our sector. My parents had gathered the perfect audience needed to permanently blacklist me from the industry. I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and positioned myself near a massive floral arrangement, silently observing the room dynamics. It did not take long to notice the highly coordinated whispering as I moved slowly through the crowd. Conversations abruptly halted when I walked past. Executives who had praised my genetic research just a month ago suddenly found urgent reasons to look the other way, checking their phones or staring at the ceiling. The social freeze was absolute and incredibly calculated. I tracked the epicenter of this toxic rumor mill directly to my mother. Beatrice was holding court near the grand marble fireplace, surrounded by a group of key industry investors. She wore a stunning emerald gown and a deeply tragic, entirely fabricated expression of maternal sorrow. I stepped closer, remaining just outside her peripheral vision, and listened to the poison she was actively injecting into my professional network. It has been an incredibly difficult year for the family, Beatrice sighed heavily, pressing a perfectly manicured hand to her chest. We tried absolutely everything to help Julian. We paid for the best therapists and gave him unlimited time off. But his mental state just continued to deteriorate. The pressure of the sector is simply too much for fragile minds to handle. An investor looked genuinely concerned. I had no idea he was struggling with clinical psychiatric issues. His data models were always so precise during the pitch. Beatrice shook her head sadly, dabbing at a non-existent tear near her eye. The models were largely Silas's conceptual work. Julian just handled the basic data entry and routine coding. Unfortunately, his delusions grew out of control. He started hallucinating that he owned the entire company and invented the algorithm himself. We had to let him go for his own safety and the safety of the merger. We are hoping this financial cutoff forces him to finally seek the psychiatric help he desperately needs. The absolute flawless delivery of her lie was staggering. In our industry, being labeled a psychiatric liability was a total career death sentence. I stepped out from behind the floral arrangement and walked directly into the center of their exclusive circle. The temperature in the group dropped instantly. Beatrice froze, her champagne glass hovering inches from her lips. The investors shifted uncomfortably. "Good evening, Mother," I said. My voice was perfectly modulated, completely calm, and carrying just enough volume to turn heads across the room. "I apologize for missing the start of your fictional storytelling session." Before Beatrice could recover her composure and call security, a heavy hand clamped down hard on my shoulder. The overwhelming stench of designer cologne and expensive liquor hit my senses a fraction of a second before I heard his voice. "Julian, there you are," Silas boomed, projecting his voice loudly enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. His fingers dug painfully into my collarbone, a silent physical threat masked as brotherly affection. He stepped seamlessly in front of me, using his broad shoulders to try and physically block me from the investors. Silas forcefully guided me toward the shadowed edge of the grand ballroom, away from the important guests. He finally released my shoulder, grabbing a massive crystal goblet filled to the brim with dark, heavy red wine from a passing waiter's silver tray. "You really do not know when to quit, do you?" Silas hissed, dropping the fake smile the instant our backs were to the crowd. His eyes were wide with a manic, greedy energy. "You just could not sit in your miserable little apartment and accept defeat. You had to drag yourself all the way up this hill to try and ruin my night." I looked at him with complete clinical detachment. "If your product works exactly the way you promised Harrison it does, you have absolutely nothing to worry about, Silas." A muscle in his jaw twitched violently. He took a large gulp of the red wine. He looked me up and down, his eyes locking onto my pristine, expensive white shirt and tailored suit. A dark, vicious realization settled over his features. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, holding the crystal goblet of wine directly over my chest. "Let me explain the natural order of the universe to you, Julian," he whispered, his voice dripping with venom. "I am the star of this legacy. I am the face of this entire empire. You are nothing but the grease in the gears of my success. Remember your place." With a deliberate, sharp flick of his wrist, Silas tipped the heavy crystal goblet forward. A massive wave of dark red wine cascaded downward, splashing violently across the front of my crisp white shirt and expensive suit jacket. The cold liquid soaked instantly through the fabric, clinging to my skin and spreading like a massive, undeniable bloodstain. A collective sharp gasp echoed from the nearest group of guests. The conversations died instantly as people turned to stare. Silas immediately threw his hands up in the air, feigning theatrical horror. "Oh my God, Julian, I am so incredibly sorry," he shouted loudly, making sure everyone heard him. "My hand just slipped. Let me get you a towel. You must be so embarrassed." I did not scream. I did not burst into tears. I did not raise my hand to strike him. I simply stood there, dripping in his pathetic attempt at humiliation. And I smiled. It was not a forced smile. It was a genuine, terrifying expression of absolute certainty. It was the smile of an apex predator looking at a mouse that had just eagerly walked into a steel trap. Silas's fake apology faltered instantly. The smug satisfaction drained completely from his face, replaced by a sudden, chilling confusion. He expected me to shatter. He expected me to run away crying. Instead, I was radiating an icy, untouchable power. I turned my back on him. The crowd instinctively parted for me, creating a wide, clear path to the exit. I walked with my head held high, my posture immaculate, carrying the dark red stain like a medal of honor rather than a mark of shame. I pushed open the massive front doors and stepped out into the crisp, cool night. I reached into the pocket of my ruined suit and pulled out my smartphone. I dialed my intellectual property lawyer. Valerie answered on the very first ring. "Are you safely off the property?" she asked, her voice sharp and ready. "I am completely clear of the perimeter," I replied, walking down the sweeping illuminated driveway. "They are blinded by their own arrogance." I could hear the satisfying clack of a keyboard on her end of the line. "Give me the word, Julian." I looked up at the clear night sky, a deep sense of absolute peace settling over my analytical mind. "Activate the Omega Protocol," I commanded, my voice cutting sharply through the quiet night. "They think they just finalized the sale of the algorithm, but they have absolutely no idea that they only sold a completely empty, useless shell." The sterile, temperature-controlled server room at Horizon Pharma headquarters hummed with the quiet, continuous power of a multi-million-dollar computing cluster. Harrison stood with his arms crossed tightly over his tailored suit. His sharp eyes were locked onto the massive digital displays mounted across the reinforced glass walls. This was the exact moment the highly publicized $2 billion acquisition transitioned from signed legal paperwork into a tangible corporate asset. The due diligence period was officially over. It was time to integrate the most advanced biological algorithm in the world into the Horizon Pharma infrastructure. Dr. Aris, the highly respected Chief Technology Officer of Horizon, sat at the primary command console. His fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard with practiced precision. A team of senior software engineers stood behind him, meticulously monitoring the secure data transfer from the encrypted hard drives that my father and brother had personally delivered to the executive suite earlier that morning. The atmosphere in the room was incredibly thick with intense anticipation. Harrison had staked his entire professional reputation on this specific merger. He had convinced his demanding board of directors that acquiring this specific genetic prediction technology would position Horizon Pharma a full decade ahead of their fiercest competitors. He remembered Silas standing in the boardroom during the final pitch, flashing that bright, charismatic smile, promising seamless integration and unparalleled data processing speeds. "We have successfully bypassed the initial security firewalls," Dr. Aris announced. His voice carried a note of professional satisfaction. "The core interface is loading onto our primary servers now. The file architecture looks incredibly sophisticated, Harrison." Harrison nodded slowly, a tight smile forming on his lips. "Boot it up," he commanded. "Let us see exactly what $2 billion buys us today." The massive screens at the front of the room flickered to life. A beautifully designed, sleek graphic user interface materialized in crisp, high definition. It was the exact same pristine dashboard Silas had showcased during his numerous investor presentations. The layout was incredibly intuitive, displaying complex biological modeling parameters with elegant simplicity. Harrison felt a profound surge of vindication. The technology was real, and it now belonged entirely to him. "Run the first batch of oncology genomic sequences," Harrison instructed, stepping closer to the glass partition. "Use the historical data from our lung cancer trials. I want to see the predictive mutation timeline generated in real time." Dr. Aris nodded, his eyes fixed intently on his monitor. He imported the massive data set into the newly installed system and clicked the execution command. A sleek loading bar appeared in the center of the main display screen. It glowed a vibrant, promising blue. The room fell completely silent, save for the rhythmic humming of the massive cooling fans keeping the server racks at optimal temperatures. Everyone held their breath, waiting to witness a revolutionary leap in medical technology. The progress bar reached exactly 12%. Then it completely froze. The vibrant blue color instantly shifted to a harsh, blinding red. A sharp, discordant warning tone blared from the diagnostic speakers, shattering the quiet anticipation of the laboratory. Harrison frowned, his posture instantly rigid. "What just happened?" Harrison asked sharply. "Did we overload the processing capacity?" Dr. Aris leaned closer to his monitor, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "No, the computing cluster is operating at less than 5% capacity. The system simply halted the execution sequence. I am pulling up the back-end diagnostic logs right now." The large display screen flashed violently. The elegant graphic interface vanished entirely, replaced by a stark black command prompt window. A single line of bold red text blinked aggressively in the center of the screen. "Fatal error. Kernel access denied. Commercial license revoked." "Fix it," Harrison snapped, his voice dropping to a dangerous, demanding register. "We own the proprietary rights to this software entirely. Bypass the administrative lock." Dr. Aris hammered his fingers frantically across his keyboard. He opened multiple diagnostic windows, his eyes darting rapidly across streams of scrolling code. The confident posture he had held just moments ago completely evaporated. A cold sweat began to form along his hairline. He typed another sequence of commands, attempting to force the system to recognize their newly minted administrative credentials. The screen flashed again. Authentication failed. Connection to primary host severed. Harrison stepped directly behind his chief technology officer, his presence looming like a dark storm cloud. "I do not pay you to read error messages, Aris. I pay you to integrate the asset. Where is the core algorithm?" Dr. Aris slowly turned around in his chair. His face was entirely devoid of color. He looked like a man who had just watched a ghost walk through the server room walls. "Harrison," Dr. Aris started, his voice barely a raspy whisper. The core algorithm is not on these hard drives. What do you mean it is not on the drives? Harrison demanded, his voice echoing sharply off the glass walls. Victor and Silas handed those drives directly to our legal team. We verified the file sizes during the initial audit. We paid for the entire intellectual property portfolio. The file sizes match the audit because the drives are packed with dense, highly complex encrypted routing protocols, Dr. Aris explained. His hands were visibly shaking as he pointed to the scrolling data on his monitor. They sold us a beautifully constructed hollow shell. The interface we just looked at is nothing but a localized visual wrapper. It does not actually process any genetic data at all. Whenever Silas ran a simulation during the pitch meetings, the interface was silently sending an external application programming interface call to a remote, highly secure server located somewhere completely outside this building. Dr. Aris swallowed hard, terrified of the news he was delivering. The actual neural network, the artificial intelligence that performs the complex biological calculations, lives entirely on that external server. We never bought the machine. We only bought a temporary digital key to access the machine. And the key? Harrison asked, his voice dropping to a lethal, icy whisper. Dr. Aris looked back at the glaring red error message on the main screen. The digital key was tied to a highly specific conditional commercial license. According to the architecture logs I am seeing right here, that license was permanently revoked and manually destroyed from the host server exactly 48 hours ago. The connection is completely severed. We have absolutely zero access to the predictive models. The sterile laboratory fell into a suffocating, absolute silence. The magnitude of the deception hit Harrison with the force of a physical blow. Victor and Silas had stood in his pristine boardroom, shaken his hand, and confidently accepted a $2 billion payout for a hollow piece of software they did not even truly control. They had sold Horizon Pharma an empty box with a pretty ribbon tied around it. Harrison closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, his analytical mind rapidly calculating the catastrophic fallout. The press release had already been distributed to major financial news outlets. The board of directors had already celebrated the acquisition. Horizon Pharma stock had already surged based on the promise of this specific technology. If the market discovered they had just spent $2 billion on a dead, useless interface, the corporate stock would plummet instantly, and the board would demand his immediate resignation. He had been played for an absolute fool by a family of arrogant, incompetent frauds. "Get Gregory in here right now," Harrison ordered, turning sharply toward the heavy laboratory doors. His voice was no longer that of a composed corporate executive. It was the voice of a man preparing to burn an entire empire to the ground. Gregory, the lead counsel for Horizon Pharma, rushed into the server room 3 minutes later. He was a sharp man in a gray suit, clutching a thick leather briefcase. "Find out exactly who holds the registration for the remote server," Harrison commanded, pointing at the red error screen. "I want to know exactly who owns the actual source code. Dig through every single layer of corporate shielding they put up. Do not stop until you give me a name." Gregory opened his laptop and connected directly to the Federal Business Registry database. He bypassed standard public searches and utilized high-level legal access portals to track the intellectual property copyrights linked to the software. The room remained deadly quiet as the lawyer typed furiously. "The holding company is heavily shielded," Gregory reported, his eyes scanning the rapidly decoding data. "It is registered through a proxy legal firm in Delaware. The entity is called Aegis Code LLC. Your acquisition agreement with Victor's company states that they hold the master copyright, but that is a blatant legal fabrication. Victor's company was operating strictly on a revocable commercial license granted by Aegis Code LLC." "Who owns Aegis Code LLC?" Harrison demanded, leaning over the console. Gregory clicked the final layer of decryption. He looked up at Harrison, his expression a mixture of profound shock and deep, unsettling dread. "The primary architect, the sole managing member, and the only individual with the authorized administrative clearance to negotiate the license is listed right here. It is Julian." Harrison stood perfectly still, The puzzle pieces snapped together with brutal, undeniable clarity. He remembered the scene in the boardroom just days ago. He remembered Victor coldly firing his own son. He remembered Beatrice loudly proclaiming that Julian was delusional and mentally unstable. They had not been trying to protect the merger from a hysterical employee. They had been desperately trying to discredit the true mastermind before Horizon Pharma discovered the massive deception. The entire family had conspired to steal the payout, completely unaware that Julian held the only functional key to the empire. They had essentially sold a stolen vehicle to the most powerful pharmaceutical chief executive in the country, and the original owner had just remotely killed the engine. "Get my security team on a secure conference line immediately," Harrison commanded, striding toward the heavy wooden doors with lethal purpose. "Lock down the entire building. Find Victor and Silas right now. I am giving them exactly 48 hours to produce the actual source code. If they do not fix this, I will personally ensure they spend the rest of their miserable lives in a federal penitentiary for corporate fraud." Let us pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You are truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you have been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. My apartment was a fortified command center of absolute digital supremacy. 6 curved, ultra-high-definition monitors illuminated the darkened room with a constant, cascading stream of encrypted data. The low, steady hum of my custom-built processing units provided a comforting rhythm, masking the sounds of the bustling city streets far below. I sat in my ergonomic leather chair, drinking a cup of dark roast coffee, watching the spectacular collapse of my family's empire in real time. The aggressive, rhythmic pounding on my front door echoed through the quiet space. It was not the polite knock of a neighbor. It was the heavy, entitled strike of a man who believed every single door in the entire world should automatically open for him upon his arrival. I did not flinch. I simply shifted my gaze from my glowing monitors to the high-definition security camera feed displayed on my secondary screen. Victor stood in the hallway. My father looked entirely different from the impeccably groomed, arrogant chief executive who had ordered armed security to throw me out onto the street. His expensive silk tie was yanked loose around his neck. His face was flushed with a frantic, unhealthy shade of crimson. He was sweating profusely, shifting his substantial weight from side to side like a trapped animal rapidly running out of oxygen. I walked to the entryway with measured, deliberate steps. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. I did not greet him warmly. I stood squarely in the frame, projecting absolute, immovable authority. Victor pushed his way inside anyway, using his sheer physical bulk to force past me into the living room. He stood in the center of my apartment, his eyes darting frantically across my multi-monitor setup, desperately searching for the magical keyboard that could instantly save his collapsing corporate reality. "Let us end this childish tantrum right now," Victor ordered. His voice was loud, attempting to fill the room, but it lacked its usual terrifying resonance. The underlying tremor of absolute panic ruined his performance completely. "You have made your point loud and clear. You proved you are exceptionally clever. Now it is time to act like an adult. Put your petty grievances aside and protect the family business." He reached inside his wrinkled suit jacket. His hand was trembling so violently that he struggled to retrieve his leather-bound checkbook from his breast pocket. He pulled out a pre-written check and slammed it down onto my kitchen island with a loud, aggressive smack. I looked down at the crisp piece of paper. The handwriting was jagged and rushed, a clear indication of his failing motor skills. The amount was written in bold, desperate strokes. $1 million. $1 million, Victor declared, puffing out his chest and trying to project an air of extreme generosity. $1 million, Julian. Tax-free cash, deposited directly into your account today. That is more money than you could ever have earned working in that basement. All you have to do is sit down at that computer terminal, restore the commercial license to Horizon Pharma, and sign a standard non-disclosure agreement. You take the money, you fix the glitch you created, and we go back to being a happy family. I stared at the piece of paper, then slowly raised my eyes to meet his. The sheer, blinding audacity of his offer was almost comical. I did not blink. I did not express a single ounce of gratitude for his pathetic bribe. You sold my intellectual property for $2 billion, I stated. My voice dropped to a lethal, icy calm that filled the entire room. You attempted to steal my entire life's work to buy a luxury lifestyle for your useless son. And now, when the federal authorities are breathing directly down your neck, you think you can purchase my permanent submission with exactly 0.05% of the total acquisition value. You are not just a brazen thief, Victor. You are a profoundly terrible negotiator. The color completely drained from his face. The commanding patriarch vanished instantly, leaving behind a terrified, desperate old man. He took a stumbling step forward, raising his shaking hands in a placating gesture of surrender. "Julian, please," he begged, his voice cracking miserably. "Harrison gave us a strict 48-hour ultimatum. He is going to lock me and your mother in a federal penitentiary. He is suing our holding company for hundreds of millions in punitive damages. We are going to lose absolutely everything we have ever built. You are my son. You cannot do this to your own parents." I stepped forward and picked up the $1 million check from the marble counter. I held it gently between my fingers, letting the heavy silence stretch out. "You destroyed this family the minute you decided my intelligence was merely a disposable tool," I replied effortlessly. "You ordered armed guards to drag me out like a common criminal. You froze my bank accounts so I would starve and come crawling back to you. You did not care about flesh and blood yesterday morning. You only care right now because I am the one holding the knife firmly to your throat." With a slow, deliberate motion, I tore the thick paper directly down the middle. The ripping sound was exceptionally loud. I stacked the two halves together and tore them again. I let the shredded pieces flutter from my fingers, watching them fall like snow onto the kitchen floor right next to his trembling designer shoes. "Your money holds absolutely zero value in my apartment," I stated coldly. "Get out of my home, and you might want to call your elite defense attorneys immediately. Harrison is not known for his patience." Victor let out a strangled, agonizing gasp, burying his face in his hands as he stumbled backward out of the apartment. Less than 2 hours later, the security intercom buzzed again. This time it was Clara. The financial district gossip mill operates at lightning speed, and her situation had clearly detonated. I buzzed her up, curious to see exactly how a ruthless portfolio manager attempts to negotiate a completely bankrupt position. Clara practically stumbled into the entryway. Her pristine corporate armor was completely shattered. She was clutching a thick stack of legal documents, her hands shaking violently. "Julian," Clara gasped, her voice cracking with a desperate, manufactured emotion. "I am so incredibly sorry. I was an absolute fool. I did not know the truth. Silas manipulated me. I did not offer her a seat. I just looked at the papers in her hand. That looks like a demand for immediate payment in full." Clara burst into tears, dropping the papers onto the floor. "The dealership is holding me personally liable for the entire purchase price of the Ferrari. I owe them $185,000 payable immediately. Silas's corporate card declined, and because I signed as the primary guarantor, the debt fell entirely on me. I do not have that kind of liquid capital. If I get a massive default on my record, I will lose my portfolio manager license. I will be completely ruined." She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. "Please, Julian, take me back. We can build our own empire together. I can manage your new wealth." I looked down at her with absolute, freezing detachment. "The market has spoken, Clara. Your stock has crashed to zero. Do not ever come back here." I slammed the heavy door shut, locking the deadbolt with a satisfying metallic click. The apartment was finally purged of her toxic presence. But the war was not entirely over. My monitors suddenly flared with a new, highly aggressive red warning light. Silas was completely out of legal options, out of money, and out of time. He was now resorting to something far more dangerous. The secondary monitor on my far right illuminated with a harsh, pulsing crimson glare. It was a highly specific threat detection protocol I had written months ago. Silas had hired outside help. He had tapped into the dark corners of the digital black market, promising non-existent future payouts to a mercenary hacker named Jax. He was desperately trying to steal the foundational source code directly from my personal servers to save his own skin. It was a massive federal crime, carrying a mandatory minimum sentence that would effectively end his life. I watched the graphical representation of the cyber attack unfold across my screens. The mercenaries were bombarding my external firewall with a massive distributed denial of service attack, attempting to blind my defensive protocols. It was a sophisticated strategy, but entirely useless against a system I had built to withstand corporate warfare. I could have simply severed the connection and locked them out permanently, but that would not solve my ultimate problem. I needed to neutralize Silas completely. I needed to give him exactly what he wanted, but in a way that would orchestrate his spectacular public destruction. I opened a secure, isolated sandbox environment within my internal network. Inside, I rapidly constructed a decoy. I created a sprawling directory of highly complex, incredibly dense code. To an outside observer, it looked exactly like the $2 billion artificial intelligence model. But the file did not contain a single line of functional biological modeling. It contained a highly aggressive, self-executing digital payload. Once the file was opened on a target machine, it would hijack the host network, activate all audiovisual peripherals, and initiate a massive, uncontainable data wipe of the host server. I embedded a specific high-definition video file into the very center of the payload. I placed the decoy package deliberately near the outer edge of my security perimeter. I named the folder Master Source Code Archive. It was the digital equivalent of leaving a solid gold bar sitting on a park bench. Then, I intentionally introduced a microfracture into my own firewall, leaving a direct pathway straight to the decoy folder. The hackers found the vulnerability almost instantly. They flooded through the digital gap and grabbed the heavy data package. The progress bar hit 100%, and the external connection severed immediately. I sat in the quiet glow of my command center, taking a slow sip of my coffee. Silas was likely sitting in his expensive car right now, sweating through his designer suit, holding his laptop with trembling hands. He believed he had just saved his mansion, his reputation, and his $2 billion deal. He had absolutely no idea that he had just downloaded a digital guillotine. The morning sun cast long, sharp shadows across my apartment floor as my secondary monitor suddenly flickered to life. The digital beacon I had meticulously embedded within the decoy payload had just successfully activated. Silas had physically carried the infected flash drive directly into the primary executive boardroom of Horizon Pharma. Through the compromised audiovisual peripherals of the host machine, I now had a crystal-clear front-row seat to his absolute destruction. The high-definition camera feed showed the tense, suffocating atmosphere of the boardroom. Harrison stood at the head of the massive mahogany table, his face a hard mask of barely contained corporate fury. Victor sat rigidly to his left, violently wiping sweat from his forehead. Beatrice was clutching her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles were completely white. They were waiting desperately for their golden child to deliver their salvation. The heavy doors swung open. Silas marched into the room with the ridiculous swagger of a conquering emperor. He practically beamed with arrogant pride, completely oblivious to the catastrophic reality of his situation. He held up a sleek silver USB drive, waving it around the room like a championship trophy. "I told you there was absolutely nothing to worry about," Silas announced loudly. His confident voice echoed cleanly through my desktop speakers. "The rogue employee has been dealt with permanently, and I have personally secured the master source code archive. You can relax now, Dad. I handled the crisis." Harrison did not look amused. His jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle twitched in his cheek. He pointed a rigid, commanding finger at the main presentation console. "Plug it in right now, Silas. Dr. Harris will verify the structural integrity of the genetic algorithms immediately. If this is another one of your elaborate delays, I am having federal marshals arrest you in this very lobby for criminal fraud." Silas scoffed, feigning absolute untouchable confidence. He strutted over to the primary terminal. "I will run the execution sequence myself, Harrison. I want you to see exactly why I am the vice president of this enterprise." I watched Silas insert the silver drive into the terminal port. He eagerly navigated to the folder labeled Master Source Code Archive. He double-clicked the heavily encrypted executable file I had meticulously designed for him. "It is loading now," Silas declared with a massive, triumphant grin, turning to face his audience. "You are about to see the greatest biological predictive model on the planet." He was technically right. They were about to witness a spectacular execution, just not the one he promised. For a single agonizing second, the massive presentation screens across the boardroom went entirely pitch black. Victor let out a sharp gasp. Then, the screen snapped into brilliant resolution. It was not a sleek genetic modeling interface. It was raw security camera footage. The video played in stark, undeniable clarity. It showed the dimly lit underground parking garage of a city industrial complex. The timestamp confirmed it was recorded at exactly 3 o'clock that morning. Silas was standing next to his luxury vehicle, nervously handing a thick leather briefcase full of cash to a man wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt. The audio kicked in, perfectly amplified by the boardroom speakers. "I do not care how many firewalls he has," Silas's voice boomed, echoing loudly. "You hack into my brother's personal servers, and you rip that source code out tonight. I am paying you to completely destroy his network. Do not leave a single trace behind." The color vanished instantly from Silas's face. He spun around, staring at the massive screens in sheer, unadulterated terror. He lunged toward the keyboard, frantically slamming his fingers against the keys, desperately trying to close the video player. It was completely useless. I had firmly locked him out of all administrative controls. "What the hell is this?" Victor screamed, jumping out of his chair. He pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "Silas, what did you do? You hired criminal hackers." Before Silas could stammer out a pathetic excuse, a secondary terminal window violently popped open right next to the playing video. It was a stark black box filled with rapidly scrolling lines of aggressive, bright red code. Dr. Harris shoved Silas forcefully out of the way and stared at the console, his face turning an unhealthy shade of pale. "It is a highly aggressive computer worm," Harris shouted, his voice cracking with professional panic. "But it is not attacking the Horizon network. It is using our bandwidth to tunnel directly backward through the active connection." "Tunneling backward to where?" Harrison demanded. Harris typed furiously. "It is targeting the central database of Victor's family business. It is completely bypassing all their external security protocols because Silas gave it direct, authenticated access. The malware is systematically executing a total, unrecoverable data wipe. It is currently erasing their active client records, their accounting ledgers, their payroll systems, and decades of proprietary corporate communications. It is burning their entire corporate infrastructure to the ground. There is absolutely nothing I can do to stop it." Beatrice let out a piercing, agonizing shriek, collapsing back into her leather chair. Victor clutched his chest, struggling to breathe, as he watched his entire life's work vanish into digital ash on the massive screen. Silas just stood there, entirely paralyzed, his mouth hanging open in silent, catastrophic horror. He had actively driven a rigged explosive device directly into the heart of his own fortress, and he had handed the detonator straight to his victims. Harrison raised his right hand and signaled to the heavily armed private security personnel outside the glass walls. 2 massive guards stepped directly inside the room, taking up positions firmly in front of the exit. The boardroom was officially under absolute lockdown. "You are all going to federal prison," Harrison stated. His voice was a low, terrifying rumble. "I am officially canceling the acquisition agreement. Your company is mathematically dead. Furthermore, Horizon Pharma is filing a civil lawsuit against you personally for $500 million in punitive damages and intentional malicious misrepresentation. We will freeze every single personal asset you currently possess before the market closes today. The terrifying words, $500 million, echoed endlessly in Victor's mind, rapidly breaking down the last remaining structural walls of his physical endurance. He knew his reputation was permanently annihilated. He knew every asset he owned would be aggressively seized. Suddenly, Victor's face lost all color, turning a horrifying ashen gray. A thick sheen of cold sweat coated his forehead. He let out a sharp, choked gasp, his right hand flying up to desperately clutch the center of his chest. His legs gave out completely, and he collapsed heavily backward into the leather executive chair, gasping for air in the throes of a massive cardiac event. As paramedics rushed into the room to save the collapsing patriarch, the heavy mahogany doors swung open wide once more. I stepped over the threshold and walked directly into the center of the executive boardroom. I was wearing a meticulously tailored midnight blue designer suit that projected absolute, undeniable authority. My intellectual property attorney, Valerie, walked smoothly one step behind my right shoulder, carrying a sleek black leather briefcase. Silas physically recoiled, shrinking back as if trying to merge with the wall. He finally recognized the monstrous consequence of his own aggressive stupidity. "Good morning, Harrison," I said, my voice ringing with cool, perfectly measured confidence. "I apologize for the slight delay. I trust my brother provided an adequate demonstration of my defensive architecture." Before Harrison could respond, 5 individuals wearing sharp, dark tactical windbreakers stormed into the room. The bold, bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation printed across their backs instantly drained the remaining oxygen from the room. The lead agent, Special Agent Monroe, a tall, imposing woman with a gaze made of absolute steel, walked directly toward Silas. She pulled out a folded federal warrant. "Silas," Agent Monroe announced, her voice echoing with lethal surgical precision, "you are under arrest for severe corporate espionage, intentional deployment of malicious commercial software, and massive federal wire fraud. Turn around and place your hands firmly behind your back." Silas began to hyperventilate, sobbing openly and uncontrollably as 2 heavily armed agents grabbed his arms with practiced, unyielding force. The crisp, metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking tightly around his wrists was the most beautiful, satisfying symphony I had ever experienced in my entire life. It was the undeniable sound of absolute, inescapable justice. As the FBI dragged my weeping brother out of the building, and the paramedics wheeled my broken father away, I sat down at the table across from Harrison. Valerie slid a thick stack of finalized legal documents toward the center of the mahogany table. Harrison picked up his heavy fountain pen. He looked at me with a level of respect he had never once shown my father or brother. "Horizon Pharma is officially finalizing a commercial merger agreement directly with Aegis Code LLC. We are acquiring the entire intellectual property portfolio. The total acquisition price is $2.5 billion. I took the pen from his hand and added my own signature with a steady, practiced flourish. The deal was done. In a matter of minutes, the power dynamic of my entire life had been permanently and legally inverted. Part 8. Thiat Lap Rangioi and Mukdike Song. Du Kien 1,500 words. 6 months had passed since the heavy boardroom doors locked behind my shattered biological family. The dark reign of their fraudulent, abusive empire was permanently over, completely eradicated from the face of the earth. I stood on the pristine glass railing of my private rooftop terrace, looking down at the glittering, sprawling grid of the San Francisco skyline. I was 33 years old, and I was looking at a kingdom I had built entirely with my own intellect and unwavering resilience. The contrast between this breathtaking altitude and the suffocating, windowless basement of my parents' old house was absolute. Tonight, I was hosting an exclusive appreciation gala for the brilliant minds who were currently advancing global medicine using my uncompromised artificial intelligence architecture. Inside the luxurious penthouse reception area behind me, soft jazz music floated through the crisp air. Waiters carried silver trays of vintage champagne to the most powerful investors, scientists, and legal minds in the biotechnology sector. They were not here to celebrate a loud, incompetent sales executive. They were here to honor me. My smartphone vibrated softly inside the pocket of my tailored suit jacket. I pulled the device out and glanced at the glowing screen. A text message had just arrived from a completely unknown, unregistered number. I recognized the local area code, which usually indicated a cheap, prepaid disposable cellular phone. I unlocked the screen and opened the message thread with a calm, analytical curiosity. The block of text was incredibly long, filled with desperate grammatical errors and frantic, erratic capitalization. I read the words with cold, clinical detachment. Julian, please do not ignore this message. It is your mother. I had to buy a cheap prepaid phone from a convenience store because the federal authorities confiscated all our devices. We have absolutely nothing left. The government seized the estate, the cars, the offshore accounts, and every single piece of jewelry I owned to pay the massive restitution fines to Horizon Pharma. Silas was denied bail. The judge sentenced him to 10 years in a maximum security federal facility. He cries every time I visit him. Your father survived the heart attack, but the hospital discharged him with a massive stack of medical bills we cannot possibly pay. We are currently living in a filthy weekly motel. Victor needs expensive cardiac medication just to survive. We are starving, Julian. I am begging you on my hands and knees. You have billions of dollars now. Please just wire us $10,000. Just enough to buy his medication and get us out of this horrific motel. We are your family. You cannot just leave us here to die in the gutter. Please have mercy on your own parents. I stood perfectly still on the rooftop terrace, letting the cold wind rush past my face. I read the pathetic, crawling message a second time. 6 months ago, receiving a message like this might have triggered a slight tremor in my hands. A lifetime of deep psychological conditioning might have forced a tiny, involuntary sliver of unearned guilt into my chest. I might have felt the oppressive, heavy chain of biological obligation attempting to drag me back down into their toxic, abusive orbit. But tonight, standing under the bright California stars, I felt absolutely nothing. My heart rate remained perfectly steady. My breathing was completely calm and measured. The message did not evoke anger, sadness, or even a fleeting sense of vindictive joy. It simply registered as a highly irrelevant piece of spam data, a useless anomaly generated by a defunct system I had permanently deleted from my life. Beatrice was not asking for forgiveness. She was not apologizing for spending 33 years treating my brilliant mind like a disposable commodity. She was not showing a single ounce of genuine remorse for sitting in a boardroom and actively attempting to have me committed to a psychiatric ward so she could steal my fortune. She was simply a desperate, manipulative parasite looking for a new host to drain. She mentioned mercy. The sheer, blinding audacity of that specific word was the only thing that brought a genuine, peaceful smile to my lips. They had shown absolutely zero mercy when they ordered armed security guards to throw me out onto the street with my belongings stuffed into a cardboard box. They had shown zero mercy when they froze my bank accounts and attempted to starve me into permanent submission. They had ruthlessly written the rules of engagement. I simply executed the final commands of their own highly destructive program. I did not type a reply, explaining my total indifference to a woman who possessed zero capacity for self-reflection was a monumental waste of my cognitive energy. I simply tapped the screen and selected the message thread. I hit the delete button, watching the desperate, weeping text vanish entirely into the digital void. Then, with a slow, deliberate, and deeply satisfying motion, I selected the unknown number and added it to my permanent block list. The digital cord was finally, undeniably, and permanently severed. They were officially ghosts haunting a miserable, impoverished reality of their own creation. I had established my boundaries in reinforced steel, and I would never allow them to cross those lines again. I placed the phone back into my pocket and turned away from the edge of the roof. I walked toward the heavy glass doors leading back into the vibrant, brightly lit penthouse. As I stepped over the threshold, the warm air of the gala washed over me. Valerie immediately caught my eye from across the room. My brilliant, ruthless intellectual property attorney raised her crystal champagne flute in my direction, a sharp, knowing smile playing on her lips. She understood exactly what it took to conquer an empire. Harrison stepped away from a group of elite international investors and walked directly toward me. The chief executive officer of Horizon Pharma extended a glass of champagne, his expression radiating absolute professional respect. He did not see me as a fragile son or a background asset. He saw me as a titan. "We just received the preliminary data from the European clinical trials," Harrison said, his voice buzzing with genuine excitement. "Your predictive algorithms are currently outperforming our most optimistic financial projections by 40%. The board of directors is absolutely thrilled, Julian. You have single-handedly revolutionized the entire pharmaceutical landscape." I took the champagne glass from his hand, the cool crystal feeling perfectly solid and secure in my grip. I looked around the room, making eye contact with the brilliant scientists, the aggressive legal minds, and the powerful investors who had gathered specifically to celebrate my vision. This was my true family. This was a community built entirely on mutual respect, undeniable talent, and the absolute recognition of actual, tangible worth. I raised my glass, meeting Harrison's gaze with a calm, unwavering certainty. "We are just getting started, Harrison. The foundational architecture is perfectly stable now. We have successfully removed all the inefficient, toxic variables from the equation. The future is completely ours to write." I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of the vintage champagne. I had survived the darkest, most abusive shadows my family could construct, and I had emerged entirely unbroken, completely untouchable, and infinitely powerful. I had finally claimed my rightful place in the sun, and I would never, under any circumstances, allow anyone to turn off the lights ever again. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If there is one thing I want you to take away from this, it is that biological ties do not give anyone the right to abuse, manipulate, or steal from you. True empowerment comes from recognizing your own immense value and having the unshakable courage to walk away from those who try to keep you in the dark. You have the absolute right to build a chosen family based on mutual respect and genuine love. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect your peace and your future? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Stay strong and always protect your worth.